So everything should start with Bismillah, meaning everything should start with God, not just as a word, but as a concept, as a lived reality in our life. That the company has to start with God, meaning we have to start with the very principles of our faith in mind. So the type of business that we launch should be one that makes the world a better place. It doesn't damage the world. It doesn't damage the environment. It's not impinging upon the dignity of human beings. So we need to start with God in mind.
Okay, so assalamu alaikum everyone, and hello, welcome to another episode of Taka Talks. Today we have with us Omar the Costa Shahid. And let me tell you a little bit about Omar. Omar has over 11 years experience in media, content production, and influencer relations. His greatest passion and strength is creating strategies to connect businesses with Muslims and diverse audiences to generate revenue. He has produced content that has garnered over 50 million views, significantly increasing reach, brand awareness, and sales for his clients. Businesses across the globe have particularly noted the value of Omar's vast network of influencers, where he has personally managed and arranged international tours alongside clients with the largest Muslim influencers in the Western world, including Yasmin Mujahid, Dalia Mujahid, I think I'm saying this right, I hope so, Ali Official, Outlandish, and Maher Zain. Omar holds a BA from Europe's leading university in journalism, City University, and established himself as a writer for The Guardian, Times, Independent, and The New Statesman. Omar is currently available to consult with selective brands that display important mission and ethical practices. Welcome, Omar, to Taka Talks. And so that was the official bio. Now tell us the unofficial story.
The unofficial story is I'm a father of one very young son, based in London. I come from a mixed race family. My mother is mixed race of very, very mixed heritage. And my father's side is Pakistani, which maybe I look a bit more Pakistani than kind of the mixed side of my family. I've always just wanted to play my part in the world, contribute something meaningful, which is why I pursued journalism. And then I left journalism to pursue entrepreneurship, which I've been doing for a little while now. And the thing which I'm most passionate about is something called the spirituality of business, which is how Muslims can embed their faith into their work, into their business. One of the things I think is really important is that as Muslims, we don't compartmentalize our faith and our work. They should be one thing. I think there needs to be a lot more thinking into that. How do we actually infuse Islamic ethics and spirituality into our day-to-day work? So that's something that I've been thinking about for a little while.
Thank you for that introduction. You actually brought up something that I wanted to talk about. So we have, Taka Talks, one of our focal points is really Islamic finance and the Islamic economy in general. And that's why we have you as a guest on our show. And interestingly enough, there is more than sort of one person who sees that there's a need to fuse business practices and business in general with Islam and Islamic tenets and sort of Sharia, etc. But why is it that Muslims are particularly susceptible and particularly want to do this? You rarely see anybody go, well, we should have a sort of a Christian type of business practices or even Jewish business practices or whatever religion. It's always, when it comes to this kind of fusing religion and business together, it's always the Muslims doing it. What makes us different?
We'll be right back after the break.
Taka Talks brings you stories from around the world that will help you understand how crypto and Islamic finance can change our lives for the better. Subscribe and follow us to keep learning.
I would actually approach it from a slightly different angle. I'm not convinced that Muslims do approach business with Islam enough. And I think I've heard too many Muslims say things like business is business. And the implication of that is our faith is separate to our business. Perhaps, in Riyadh and in Saudi, maybe there's a bit more thinking as to how faith is incorporated into business. But from what I've seen in the Western world, there definitely is a compartmentalization and distinction. But the reason why it's really important that we do inculcate and infuse Islamic ethics into business is because Islam is a unified way of life. We're supposed to approach everything from a faith-based perspective, and that includes, our what you call mu'amalat, our interactions day to day with people and in business. And the Quran itself has surprisingly quite a lot in terms of business and how we should approach business. For example, the first verses of Surah Mutaffifin, which some scholars even believe are some of the first verses revealed in Medina, they talk about the importance of giving people their due. And that applies both on the consumer side as well as, the entrepreneur, the seller, the trader. But that even goes beyond, just thinking about business interactions to generally, how we treat people, that we should be treating people fairly and with justice, and so on. So really at the heart of our faith is this idea of, treating people well, treating people with fairness and justice, but also doing things with excellence. For example, the Prophet, peace be upon him, says that, whenever you do something, do it with itqan, with excellent execution of something. So we have all these references in our faith to remind us that on the one hand, we should be the very best at what we do. We shouldn't settle for mediocrity. We should be aiming for ihsan, excellence. And on the other hand, it's not just about striving to be the best in terms of, creating the best workplace, but the ethics of our faith have to be embedded into everything. Even, for example, thinking about our meetings with people. How do we conduct those meetings? Even in a virtual world, how do we ensure that we give people our time, and that we're not distracted when we're speaking to people on meetings? One of the small things, for example, there's so many small things you can do. For example, just maximizing your screen so you don't see all the other tabs. Closing your notifications. All these things from our Islamic principles, but we need to adopt them into our modern way of life. Because the Prophet, peace be upon him, was present when he was with people. He would give them his all. So that's just one small micro example among many when it comes to business and how we should be applying our faith.
Yeah, actually, it's very interesting because so we have to really localize. Okay, of course, if you live in a Muslim country, and alhamdulillah, we are blessed to live in a Muslim land, so everything turn around the salat, everything turn around the Islamic principle. So, and actually, you cannot be a part-time Muslim. There's no such a thing. So, in all your action, you have to do everything according to your full Islamic capacity. And I think here, if I understand clearly, it's more of bringing the light of this adab and culture in a minority Muslim country where it's very difficult for some people, some brothers or sisters, sometimes to even identify as Muslim. So let's say it's time for Salat, you have a meeting with a non-Muslim and you apologize that you have to go to toilet or you have to go, I don't know, go to smoke. But the reality, you go to pray. And you have to, and you have to stop the meeting in the middle maybe and say, I'm sorry, I have to take my time. It seems to be very difficult for people because of the fact of them living in the West to approach it. So sometimes they have to apologize because of the minority complex. So I don't know what it is exactly. So can you shed some maybe example on how Muslims definitely struggle into being who they are fully, and that's something that happened in France, especially in the worst possible country in Europe in that regard. And I'm French, so I can testify on that. So, so that would be interesting because it's different position here. If you're in the Muslim majority, it's a different game. Okay, and then you have to embrace all you practice and all you, like you say, attached to you. Business is not separate from you being a Muslim. And then when Sharon also touched a point that is interesting, when it comes to religion, other religion actually they embrace fully them being Jewish and practicing their business in a Jew way, whatever it is. They don't separate it as well. Likewise for some Christian. So it's not like specific to Muslim. It's just, I think, the location. So you will see that, like I say, maybe Muslim in Europe or in the US might apologize from being who they are because of the surrounding around them, and say, oh, if I say to people I'm doing Sharia compliance and I'm in America, it might not work. They have banned the word Allahu Akbar. Can you believe? In France, they try to ban it. Allahu Akbar, they try to ban it, not knowing what is the meaning. Oh, because some of the crazy people are using Allahu Akbar when they do an act of craziness, they associate the Allahu Akbar to be a bad thing. Allah is great. Allah is the greatest. What's wrong with that? So, if I'd love to see how is your approach, being where you are in the UK maybe, and enlighten us because we want to know, and that's how we benefit to fully be, who we are.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So there definitely is a distinction between Muslims who live in Muslim majority countries who live Islam a bit more organically, but also don't have the state interferences and people in the private sector trying to stop them from, for example, going to Jummah or even just, for example, having to ask, your boss that I want to go for Jummah. And I've heard situations, for example, in the UK, I've heard one of the biggest charities in the UK, a Muslim employee felt so isolated, left out, and was felt to made bad for being a Muslim. So he asked his boss, for example, can I go for Jummah, for the Friday prayer? And his boss said to him, was unhappy with it, and turned around and said to him, well, if I wanted to go and if someone else wanted to go and ride their bicycle in the middle of the day on Friday, would I give them the permission to do that? Which he found absurd. It's like, how can you equate him going to a Friday prayer, which is obligatory as a Muslim man, with someone leisurely going for a bicycle ride? So there's a couple of issues. One is this sense of discrimination, and perhaps racism and Islamophobia, and the other thing is the fact that people just aren't educated. They don't know enough about faith because in Western societies, they are secular societies. And because they're secular societies, they don't learn about the importance of faith. And therefore, you get instances where Muslims are invited to Christmas parties where there's alcohol. They might be given alcohol as presents, and various things like this. There's this pure lack of education in the workplace, and I think we see its most extreme form in places like France. Where of course you have the hijab banned in public institutions, and I even had somebody reach out to me recently on LinkedIn because I have the word Muslim in my LinkedIn bio, and she said to me, "There's no way I could have Muslim in my bio in France." So there is definitely discrimination and hurdles to overcome, but I think Muslims are becoming more organized in Europe and in the US. We're becoming more equipped. We understand our faith, and we understand how to approach these issues much better now. I think slowly, we're going to become less defensive, and we can start to organize ourselves in a way in which we can challenge these discriminatory policies. So things slowly are changing.
Yeah, it's really, really amazing to hear your side of the story. I mean, I grew up in France, so I can really relate to the strong, discrimination. And actually, it's not really only at the state level, okay? Because usually you have a bunch of guys at the state level who could be just on living in another planet, and establishing rules and regulation and things. But the overall population actually, they really don't care, if you live you only full self as Muslim or Christian or Jew. Actually, among the population itself, you will see not too much of overreacting. And it's because the population, the masses actually, are okay with you being different. That, for example, as a French, they go to, okay, if the general population, French population, accept it as you are, they say, we need to find a more difficult way. Let's say, let's go to public school and ban things in a public school, for example, or in a public, places where the government has his so-called say, But in general, the French, they are not like all, Islamophobia and stuff like that. And that's why you see the minority right-left people, right-wing people in the government imposing things at the national level. You see, because the adoption. So to be honest with you, I used to live next to a Catholic Portuguese neighbors. They always respected us as Muslim. We used to invite them for with Ramadan and giving them food from our Ramadan. Of course, when they invite us to Christmas, we tell them, sorry, we cannot, And we used to have Jewish across the street as well, And they had no, not in the same neighborhood. They had a better neighborhood, the Jewish component, but they were also understanding our principle and our religion. They were not like completely blocked to the way we are. Those religions have been there for years and years, so they understand each other. But the government, as you say, imposed some restriction law and stuff like that. And I see the same thing happen in the UK now. It used to be a beautiful places to live on, where every single religion, ethnicity had rights. But little by little, you see the government imposing the little restriction on, you're Muslim. I just want to remind you. But I'm sure that your neighbors doesn't care. Nobody say no to a smile, to a hi, to a coffee, to, It's very sad to see that it's like I say, it's at a state level that they try to impose this kind of hatred and separation. But if you treat a human being, they're all attached to God. Their heart is attached to the mercy of God. So they by default they are nice. Even the worst of human being, at the end of the day, has some kind of rahmah. And if you act nice to him, he will be say, this guy, mashallah, is a good guy, and why should I be, But who fuel this kind of, we should not support them in what they do, like you said, at the workplace. You have to apologize to go pray, or you have the guy bringing the bicycle issue on the things. That's ridiculous.
Let me bring this back to the main road here. Omar, your interests, Omar, are is in what is called spirituality in business. Can you actually explain a little bit more what that means?
She will cut me off everything I say previously. Omar, she will censor me and cut me off. I just let you know. Don't worry.
No problem. There's this. I would break it down into three things that I would like Muslims to think about when launching a business. The first is, we know in our faith that, there's a saying that anything which doesn't start with Bismillah is cut off. It's severed from barakah, from blessings. We have this.
We'll be right
idea.
back after the break.
We believe that the financial system is broken and that our banks and insurance companies don't have our best interests at heart. We've built Takadao to help us get together as a community to save, earn an access credit. Join us today and discover how you can grow your savings while helping others.
This idea. So everything should start with Bismillah, meaning everything should start with God, not just as a word, but as a concept, as a lived reality in our life. That the company has to start with God, meaning we have to start with the very principles of our faith in mind. So the type of business that we launch should be one that makes the world a better place. It doesn't damage the world. It doesn't damage the environment. It's not impinging upon the dignity of human beings. So we need to start with God in mind. The second thing is, when we're running our business, we should look to what the Prophet, peace be upon him, taught us about running a business. The Prophet, peace be upon him, himself, he was a merchant, he was a entrepreneur. Before he was a prophet, he engaged in trade. So it is a sunnah to be a business person, and there are many prophetic teachings that we can take in terms of, for example, things like paying people on time. Is a sunnah. Things like making sure that your contracts are thorough and robust. And making sure that there's equity in those contracts, making sure that your employees are treated well. There are so many things we can talk about within business, but the key thing is that, for example, Omar radiallahu anhu, he said that no one should enter the market and trade unless you've learned the fiqh of business, meaning that there should be a very baseline level, a very you should have a good understanding of how to engage in business before you engage in business. Otherwise, you'll end up in things like riba. You'll end up engaging in things like usury if you're not careful, because you won't know the rules behind business. And then the third aspect is, how do we actually leave a meaningful legacy? How do we leave behind a business which is contributing towards the world? It's not just something which is just for your self-interest. Adam Smith talks about the invisible hand, which is the idea that markets are regulated by people's self-interest, which to some extent is true. Business, to a large extent, is a way for us to make money. But Islam also, for example, the Prophet, peace be upon him, he said something similar 1,000 years before that, which is that I won't interfere in the prices. The prices are in the hands of God. So there's overlaps there, but Islam would go one step further, that we do not make money just for ourselves. That's why we have the institutions of zakat. We have, for example, sadaqah. We have the idea that money should circulate in society. It shouldn't just accumulate in the kind of the 1%, which the Quran speaks against. It speaks against money accumulating among a few. So it's our duty to make sure that we spend the money that we earn not just on ourselves and our families, but on other people. Why? So that we can create a better, more just society in which money is circulating properly.
Thank you. I believe you have a course on this.
Yeah, so the course is called The Spirituality of Business, which I launched recently. Alhamdulillah, it's got some good feedback. At the moment, I just want to continue getting some feedback to iterate it and make it better. And I'm hoping that it's a lifelong journey. Some people said to me that you're going to eventually run out of things to learn about and knowledge with regards to Islam in business. I don't think so. There's so much that you can constantly learn from the Quran and from the Sunnah and from the companions. And once you read a Quranic verse, you can read it again and learn something new. And there's you can segment business into many different things. Like, what is the spirituality of sales? What is the spirituality of marketing? What is the spirituality of operations? What is the spirituality of how we conduct meetings? What is the spirituality of it's endless. There's so much we can. What is the spirituality of HR? All of these things we can go into. So that's why I think it's really a lifelong mission.
If I may say, so alhamdulillah, so you focus on the Muslim, and that's good, because as you mentioned, unfortunately, there's a lot of misconception on like some Muslim would say this is business and this is religion. So they leave the religious aspect when it comes to business, and that they need definitely proper education in order for them to have successful business and barakah into their venture. But do you also advise, I would say, because okay, there's not enough entrepreneurs and self-started Muslim founders in Europe, but do you advise also and help a non-Muslim entity to embrace the Muslim community to feel much better, much comfortable, to be even more productive into an environment where Islamic principles are accepted?
Yeah. So I actually have a company called MIN, which is the world's first Muslim influencer agency, and we've worked with many of the biggest brands in the world. Whether they are fashion brands, whether they are supermarkets, whether they're food products, whether across various different spaces, and we have advised them about things like what is Ramadan, how do you sell to Muslim consumers in Ramadan? How do you understand Muslims? What's important to Muslims? What does our faith teach? And we've had many brands who we've been able to educate about, Islam and Muslims and what Muslims want and so on. So I think there's been an increased desire over the past few years from mainstream brands to want to know who Muslims are, and how do we sell to them. On the one hand, I think there is the element of brands just wanting to get a piece of the pie, the economic pie, and therefore it's not necessarily with Muslims' interests at heart. But on the other hand, there are many non-Muslims who actually are genuinely want to engage with the Muslim community. And you see this with, for example, CEOs of large companies. They're fasting a few days in Ramadan to show solidarity with their Muslim employees.
Yes.
We're seeing all of this happen, over the past few years, and it'll be interesting to see how it develops over the coming years as well.
Amazing.
This is actually interesting. It was a question that I wanted to ask you. Why do you think brands are increasingly more interested in targeting the Muslim consumer? Obviously, population growth has to do with it, I presume, and the fact that it is a very young population and a growing population. But beyond that, do you see any changes in the Muslim youth that cause brands to want to target them more or to accommodate them more?
Yeah. So there's a few things here. So the first thing is that I think brands have over time recognized the economic incentives of targeting Muslims. That's become more and more obvious as Muslims have grown in numbers, over the past, 10 to 15 years. In the UK, for example, it's expected that Muslims will grow from 4 million to 13 million, in the next 25 to 30 years. So the numbers are increasing, and therefore the economy that Muslims participating is growing. The second thing is that Muslims are becoming more visible in society. So, for example, just to talk about the UK, the mayor of London is a Muslim. Some of the leading sports people, like Mohammed Salah, in the Premier League, he's Muslim. Won the Great British Bake Off, is Muslim. So, because of the visibility of Muslims, this has increased or given more reason for brands to want to target the Muslim economy. And then I think brands are also seeing that it just makes sense because, for example, one study showed that ready-to-wear modest fashion was outselling almost every other item of clothing, types of clothing. Modest fashion on Google was termed a breakout term in 2019. It had a 500% increase in search. So there's many of these trends happening, and brands are becoming quite aware that they need to, and beyond that, because so many of their employees are Muslims. That's also another kind of wake up call for them to target the Muslim economy. So there's various reasons why, but I think they're waking up to the fact that economically it makes sense, and the fact that there's just so many visible Muslims today.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, the other fear that is often the case with, I guess, both Muslims and non-Muslim entrepreneurs and brands is, will targeting Muslims somehow alienate the non-Muslims? And how do you compensate for this?
Yeah, there is a fear that some brands have. They don't want to be too direct and outwardly target Muslims. I've heard this a lot. I mean, I would question that and say, well, if you're that weak and you don't want to lose customers because you want to do something which should be very, very normal, I would question your reason for going into business and your ethics. So I think it's a very weak, flimsy, and pretty rubbish excuse to do that. And then it really tells us who are your consumers, who are your buyers, if they're not willing to buy from you because you're targeting Muslims. That's on the one hand. The second thing is, look, if a brand wants to take a slightly more cautious perspective and try to be inclusive and not alienate people, and they really believe that that's the right thing for them, there are ways to do that. For example, you can segment your audience. You can run paid ads specifically to Muslims such that non-Muslims won't see those ads, so they're more appropriate for Muslims. You can segment your email newsletter, and you can have uh, specific messaging going out at certain times of the year. For example, let's say it's Ramadan and you want to promote a certain food item or drinks or whatever. You can target Muslims with your product maybe like just before iftar time, so that they're more likely to maybe want to buy it or something like that. So there are ways. I would like to hope that we move into a world in which people are not scared to create products for Muslims and target them. But at the same time, the reality of the world is that brands are going to be scared. In which case, you can segment your audience and target Muslims based on their interests and so on.
Interesting. So let me tell you our story a little bit, and maybe you can shed some light based on the experience. So Takadao, we're trying to build financial products. And obviously, because we're Muslim, we're building financial products that we can use. And therefore, it is important that these things are Sharia compliant. So now, on the one hand, obviously, we want to target Muslims because, it's Sharia compliant and they are our natural audience just because of where we are located, etc. But we didn't design it. We didn't design these products only to be for Muslims. It's a better way of doing things because Islamic finance is a superior way of doing finance, of conducting finance. So we really do want it to be a global product. So this is the a bit of a conundrum that we have. It's like, okay, do you want to just say it's Sharia compliant, and then the question I ask is it only for the question that people ask me, is it only for Muslims? And I'm like, no, of course not, right? And then on the other hand, there's the fact that Muslims actually hate being targeted. Somehow, if you tell them, oh, something is specifically for you, they like it less. Somehow, I don't know if that's a legitimate experience. What do you think?
So this is something that I've noticed time and time again with a lot of brands, especially startups, Muslim startups. They don't know how to position themselves. Are we a mainstream brand or are we a Muslim brand? And sometimes you get internal conflict and division within the team, within the senior team. Some of them want to go mainstream and some of them don't. And this is actually a really, really difficult and challenging thing, but something that needs to be sorted out from the start. Because if you don't have the internal alignment between the senior management team, you're going to cause different messaging. Internally within your team, they're not going to know who you are and how to create messaging that appeals to people. And then in your marketing, you're going to have conflicting messaging, or not. It's not going to be completely. It's not going to make complete sense because you don't have that clarity yourself. So I think the first step is, brands need to understand who you are. What is your brand identity? There's nothing wrong with marketing yourself as a mainstream brand and having Islamic principles, in your business and within your product, that's fine. For example, there's a brand in the UK called FIDA, formerly Primary Finance. They're a home Sharia compliant home buying solution. Their entire team is Muslim. It's a Sharia compliant product, but they don't emphasize the fact that they are Sharia compliant. There's also another similar company called Way Home, and that was founded by Muslim, but it's now run by non-Muslims, and it's a Sharia compliant product. But you won't find on the entire website that Sharia compliant unless you really search, because ultimately a Sharia compliant product is universal. It's for everybody. And that's one thing that I would really encourage Muslims to think about, is that we don't want to create a Muslim economy just for Muslims. We don't want to trade Muslim to Muslim only. Muslims should support each other first and foremost. We're brothers and we're sisters. Our ultimate allegiance is to one another first and foremost before others. But if we want to do dawah, if you look historically how Islam has spread, it's been through trade, oftentimes. Whether you look at the Tamil Muslims across the Indian subcontinent, if you look at Indonesia, many of these countries, Islam spread because Muslims and non-Muslims came into contact with each other and did trade together. And then the non-Muslims would find out about Islam, would find out about the good principles and practices of Muslims, and Islam would spread. So one of the most effective ways that we can spread Islam is through trade. And if we are going to spread Islam through trade, we need to be intelligent in how we do trade. We can't package it in a way in which it looks kind of, it looks alien, to non-Muslims, especially in the West. If all the packaging and all the marketing looks like it's just for Muslims, and all the people look like Muslims, it's not going to attract, non-Muslims. So it's important to be wise and intelligent about how we conduct business, how we market, how we sell, how we trade, and making sure that our Islamic principles are at the heart of it, and we're living our Islam through our businesses. Our conduct and our etiquette has to be prophetic, and that's how we're going to hopefully spread Islam through business.
Yeah, that makes sense. So where do you see the greatest opportunities for businesses that want to, I guess, spiritual businesses in your parlance? Where are the greatest opportunities today?
The greatest opportunities. I don't think there is necessarily a particular industry where there is the greatest opportunity. I think we should be thinking about kind of a like business bid'ah, kind of business innovation, not on a religious perspective, but from a from a business perspective, how we innovate. And there's so many ways we can innovate. One of the ones which seems most obvious is Islamic finance, which you guys will know a lot about. And one of the complaints we hear time and time again is that we're not innovating with Islamic financial products. Islamic finance really started to take off, 25 years ago, 30 years ago. But since then, how much innovation has actually happened? So that's one thing that I think Muslims can massively offer to the world. Muslims work on the basis of risk sharing. We don't work on the basis of debt and interest and kind of fixed returns. There has to be risk sharing, and that's something that even there was a talk at the Bank of England a few years ago, and the speaker, who was a non-Muslim, said that in the West we need to adopt these Islamic principles of risk sharing, because riba, this idea of usury, is really harming society. So Islam has so much to offer, and I think whatever industry you're in, whether it's Islamic finance, whether it's fashion, no matter what it is, we can bring our ethics to it to improve it. For example, whether it's fashion, we need to get away from fast fashion. Fast fashion meaning that we're creating clothes in factories where people are badly paid, where they're mistreated, in unsafe conditions. Why? So that we can get cheaper clothes. Who said Muslims should be buying things cheaper? If we continue to buy things cheaper, we're going to continue to contribute to the systems which are creating these bad conditions for people. So there's nothing wrong with Muslims spending a little bit more money to get better quality things, right? So that's on the kind of consumer perspective, but also on the business perspective. If it costs you an extra £3 to get something made, but to a high quality and people are treated fairly, that's much better and be much more rewarded than creating things which are cheap and people are treated badly. The same thing with food. We live in a world today where we're consumed with cheap food, and cheap food is not going to nourish us. It's not nutritious for us. And if you look at the conditions in which, for example, animals are raised, for example, the battery farm chickens and so on, it's completely un-Islamic for animals to be treated like that. We're supposed to be treating animals with kindness. This is what the Prophet, peace be upon him, taught us. So we need to get out of the mindset of this kind of turbo capitalism and just producing more and more and more. Islam asks us to take a step back and consume less. If we could consume less, there would be less demand and therefore less pressure to constantly create products which are damaging our world and harming people and the planet and animals and so on. So whatever industry you're in, I would ask you to infuse Islamic ethics into it, because that is really the solution of how we're going to make our businesses better no matter what industry you're in.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. I wanted to just talk about the Islamic finance point of view. I think, as you mentioned, there's been very little innovation in the Islamic finance space, or at least there hasn't been enough. And I think one of the main problems is because the financial industry is tied to banks and the fiat currency and that infrastructure. So it's actually incredibly difficult to innovate in an infrastructure that is so much tied to riba, right? There's very, very little you can do to escape that fact. And so Islamic finance today, the true innovation is happening on things like blockchains and cryptocurrencies, because it's not tied to riba, because it's a new infrastructure. So this is one of the things about Islamic finance, which has been handicapping it, is simply infrastructure, right? If you have to deal with the banks at the end of the day, how far away can you get? How innovative can you really be? If you have to deal with regulations which are tied to banks and interests at the end of the day, there really is very limited what you can do. Yeah, go ahead, Murad.
Yeah, and you pointed out a few interesting points when it comes to bringing value as as a human, not just as a Muslim. One of the first vision that we saw actually when we were looking at micro insurance. Okay, we know that the biggest players in the world after the banks, or even before the banks, are the insurance. The issue with the insurance is that it's a zero-sum game, so you have to lose in order for them to gain. Okay, so when we approach the concept of community-based insurance, is a community-based insurance that can bring community together, regardless of your religion, your color, your ethnicity. But at the core of the way of doing the business is from A to Z in the Sharia compliance way. We live this, we breathe this, we do it. So there's a way to monetize in a different way, as you mentioned, profit sharing and stuff like that. So, and as Sharon was mentioning, is that most of the time when people are building a product, they will halal stuff it, and all this kind of thing. Our approach was like, who needs a more sustainable way of insuring themselves, microinsurance, especially in Africa, 40% Muslim, 60% non-Muslim, who need to be secure, and who needs to save and get micro lending. And to our surprise, when we're talking to our customer, where they come from many walk of life and different religion, we saw a big uptake from the non-Muslim themselves, Christian, using the product because usually whatever they were using around them was at 20%, 30% interest. So when they heard about a saving plan or a lending platform with 0% interest, it was, wow, is it for real? So as you mentioned, uplifting, and my discussion with many of them was kind of amazing. It's like, why are you doing it? In their own mindset, they don't even know that the Christian and the Jewish even, they are not supposed to take interest. In their own book, they are aligned with us. It's just some of the few people who started in their own group to charge interest or to make the system work that way, that it happened. And then we understand that the economical system that we're living in encourage the loan. A bank without having hundreds of loans will not be a bank anymore. They need to lend. That's why they're like, when we bring technology, like more sustainable blockchain technology or different asset class, like now Bitcoin is becoming recognized as an asset class the same way as the gold standard and everything, we see more stability happening. But a lot of the even Muslim and non-Muslim financial guru, they're like, are you going to stop somehow the issuance of loan? And the loan generate job, generate economy. Are you going to trade less job for less, less loan? So they try to embed the corrupted system in a very, it's like a snake biting his tails, So if you get rid of the excessive loan, you get rid of job creation, according to them. You see? So, and when you go to the fast fashion, that's the same thing. They go, oh my God, you're going to just get the clothes for the next 3 years or 1 year. They are freaking out. They're like, if we go into that level of consuming less, we don't create enough job for the growing population and so on and so forth. There's a big dilemma, So you trade off our way of being more sustainable versus a way of getting rid of thousands of jobs in Bangladesh or other places where fast fashion actually has been making the country getting out of poverty. Actually, they are, the country now is one of the fastest growing economy when it comes to the GDP and stuff. Okay, so there's a lot of you see where I'm coming from. So I'd like to see where we balance ourselves in this whole picture.
Thank you, Mona. It's a interesting dilemma that I think brands have, thinking that if we create a more sustainable, what essentially we're saying is if we create a more sustainable business, then we're going to decrease employment and impact our bottom line and so on. But I think we can't escape the fact that Islam is against excess consumption, and I don't think that the two things are mutually exclusive, that we decrease consumption and therefore the economy is impacted. I actually don't think the economy will be impacted, because you're creating, one of the things which contributes to an economy is the well-being of human beings. And that's one of the things that we tend to forget, that we don't measure success purely by immediate revenue, or immediate kind of uplift in the economy. Because one of the things that ends up happening is that when people are disgruntled, when people are unhappy, it has an impact on the economy. When people historically, for example, have lost faith in banks, and they would take their money out of banks, the banks would collapse, and it would have disastrous effects, on the economy. This is the boom and bust cycle that we see. So I don't think it's true to say that if we decrease consumption, therefore it will have an adverse economic impact.
No, I agree. I agree 100% with you. And the best example is the US. Nobody's happy. I just came back a few weeks ago. They all have tons of money somehow. Some of them, so you have a big discrepancy. They consume, credit, and at the end of the day, everybody's sad. It's like, and you talk to people on the street, nobody, from the poor guy to the billionaire, they're all freaking out, running after, I need to pay my bill. So it's kind of interesting. So yeah, so I agree. I align with you. We have to be a din al wasat, we have to be the people of the middle path, and not over, I totally agree. But that's some of the argument that they will bring on the table.
Yeah, so this has been a very interesting conversation. I guess, Omar, tell us a little bit more about what you do as a wrap up, and how you help brands and how you help Muslim entrepreneurs in their journey, and where people can find you if they want to reach out to you and get you to help them out.
I'm always a little bit reluctant to speak about myself because I don't I see the topic as more important, in trying to maximize the conversation and benefit of the conversation that we're having. Um, I do a few things. So one is the spirituality of business, which people can check out if it's for them. It's for aspiring entrepreneurs and new entrepreneurs primarily. The second thing is I have a private community of real estate investors. So we invest in real estate primarily in the US at the moment, where it's completely debt free and interest free. So the investors own the company, which owns the asset, which over time will appreciate and will sell the asset. But in the meantime, the investors will get very healthy returns from the rental yield. And the third thing is that I have a couple of marketing agencies. One is called MIN, the world's first Muslim influencer agency, and the other one is called Creed and Culture, which is a diversity inclusion marketing agency. So the agency side, alhamdulillah, they're ticking along. I'm not involved with them day to day. The two main projects are the spirituality business and the private real estate investor course. If you want to find me, I'm most active on LinkedIn, which it's probably ended up as my favorite platform. I've just launched a Instagram and TikTok account, which I'm very reluctant to ever use. But I think it's necessary to sometimes, get out your message.
Now you have to tell us why.
Oh God, that's another discussion. So I'm actually not a big fan of spending a lot of our time on social media. I think that, as Imam Ghazali says, that time is our capital. We have very limited time, and how we spend it is how ultimately our destiny will be. So we have a duty to ourselves to spend our time wisely. And social media is a thing which we can easily become excessive with. It's designed to be addictive. The more people they can keep on social media, the more ad revenue they can have. So it's all a psychological game to keep us on there, scrolling and scrolling, video after video, automatically playing. And I think before you know it, you can end up hours and hours on social media. So I'm actually a big fan of compartmentalizing our time. We should have a time in which we check social media. We have a time in which we spend with family. We have a time that we spend, with Allah. All of these things should be carefully thought about how we spend our time, and that's why that I think it's one of the biggest curses today is that we're massively distracted. One of the word for distraction in the dictionary, one of the meanings is to have mental issues. So it's got a bad connotation that I'd have been distracted. For example, shaitan, the word comes from the idea of being distant. Shaitan distances us from what we're supposed to be doing, which is thinking about Allah and worshipping God. And all of these things like social media, if we use them excessively, take us away from God. So that's why I think it's important we think about that.
Thank you so much. It was amazing talking to you and learning from your journey. And Assalamu alaikum wa
Thank
rahmatullahi
you
wa
so much,
barakatuh.
Omar.